This is going to be an example of how we can make selections of elements using either their index value or their item number as they appear within the parent element. So making a selection, and the first one is going to be an example of how you can select it using the EQ, where we'd have to select each individual element and then we apply the styling to those elements. So this is per element. If we want to select a parent and loop through all of the children and apply a background color, so in this case we're applying yellow to each one of the EQ ones, so those are going to be the second items in each one of the lists. And then the last example is using the nth child, and this is more effective because we can do the same as we did over here within one line of code, where we're selecting all of the matching items and selecting the nth child 4, which is the fourth item in the list, not using the index value, which would start at 0. This one starts at a value of 1 for the first item, and then applying the background color of green to all of the matching elements. Created an HTML file, just called it index.html, and also a JavaScript file, so that's called app21.js. So linking over to the app21.js code, so that's where we're going to write the JavaScript code. Going over to the Google hosted libraries, I've got the web browser opened on the right hand side, and this is available at developers.google.com/speed/libraries. So this is a listing of where you can access libraries, selecting the latest jQuery 3 version, so 3x version snippet, and bring that into our application. I'm going to save that within the HTML file. Also updating the editor to do a word wrap so we can see the full statement within the view of the editor that's opened on the left hand side. So I've got the file running within the local machine, and we want to check to make sure that jQuery is available. So you can do that with the $, or you could just type in jQuery, and it's going to return back the jQuery object. So that's how you can tell that jQuery is ready to go within the application. Let's also create some elements on the page, and these are going to be unordered lists, so a bunch of different list items. And this can be list 1, item 1, and we'll create 3 items in each one of the lists. So list 2, item 2, and we'll duplicate this list. So this is just regular HTML so that we have some page elements that we can interact with our jQuery code. And now let's create a second list, and this can be list 2, and this actually should stay list 1. And these are all list 2, so that there's distinct list items on the page. So we want to select those using the jQuery, and I'll also attach a class. So this one will have a class of 1, and the second list will have a class of 2, so that we can distinguish between the two classes. And we can also have one that's common, so I'll just call it box. So we can apply some styling with jQuery to both of the lists, or we could select individual ones. We can also use the tags, of course, in order to make the selection of the list. So using jQuery, we're going to make a selection of the element that we want to manipulate. And the element that we want to manipulate is going to be the unordered list, and then doing a dot separation just as we would with CSS, selecting the element, the unordered list, with a class of 1, which is different when you make the selection than having the space. So this will only select the unordered list with the class of 1 and return back all the unordered lists that are matching that. And then for the list items, this is where we want to apply the property. And the property that we want to apply is CSS. And the property is background color, and the value of that property, let's set that to red. So that will apply to all of the list items. So all of the elements that are matching this selection, it'll apply a value of red to it. If we want to apply just to the first one, we can use EQ in order to select a specific element that's within the list. So selecting it as EQ1, which will add the red background to the item of the unordered list, where the list items and it will match it to the second item within the list that gets returned back. If there is no second item, so if we were to do something like 4, it's not going to return back anything, so it's not going to make any update. And this is referring to the index value. And with index, just as with arrays, the list items are going to start with an index value of 0. So if you want to apply it to the first one, you would use EQ 0. And that will make that selection to the first one. So if you want to apply it to the second one, that's going to be 1, and to the third one, it's going to be 2. So this is how we can select to the element, to the list items, and apply that property. If we want to apply it to both lists, let's apply it to the box class. And so what this is doing is this is returning back a single selection of the first matching item and applying a styling property to it. So let's create a list of the list items. And we can do that where we select the unordered list box, and that's going to return back both of those matching items. And then we want to apply that selection to each one of those individual ones. And we can do this where we've got the unordered list box. So notice that it creates an array of items. And then we can take that array of items, and using the each method in jQuery, we can loop through each one of them, getting the index value. And then once we've got the index value, let's output the result of the index into the console. So that's going to return back index value 0 and 1 as we iterate through each one of the items. And these are referring to the unordered lists, not to the list items themselves. So within the list items themselves, we want to select the current active item. So if we do $, this is going to refer to the current object that's being iterated through. And once we select it, we'll see that that's returning back that entire list item object. So there are 2 of them on the page. If there was a third one, that would return back the third list item. So we could just update this and add a class of 3, and I'll add to that list. So now we're returning back all 3 lists. So if you still find that the console value for this is referring to the window object, which in this case it is, so it's not actually referring to the item, it's referring to the entire window object, then we need to specify which item we're referring to, and we can also add in the value and return back the value as we loop through each one of the items that are within the list. And the value is going to be referring to the element itself. Or we can even say that this is the element. And within the element, we can then apply the selection of that content. So wrapping it within the jQuery format. So turning it into a jQuery element object. Once again, now we're seeing that we're referring to the exact element items. So that means that we are able to search within there. So using the find method, and we can specify what we want to find. So in this case, we're looking for the list item with an EQ and index value of 1. So that will return back the matching element, which is going to be the second item. So if we were to copy that within the console, and I'll comment that for now, that's returning back the list item. And we have all 3 of the list items, which are the second with the ones with the index value of 2. So now that we've been able to successfully match and find the element, we can apply some styling to those elements. So let's just do the background color, and I'll set the background color to yellow to each one of those. So setting it as yellow, and now that's going to highlight the yellow in each one of those elements. And if you want to do it within one statement, I'm going to go ahead and add in some more list items. So I have 4 and 5, and then I'll update the other lists as well with 4 and 5, and then we'll select those matching list items, and I'll update the inner text of those. So we've got 5 items now. So if we want to do it another way where we're selecting them and applying the styling to it, we can select the jQuery object. So that's the unordered list with a class of box, and the list item. And using the nth child, we can select the matching item with its index value. So in this case, we're going to go for index value 3, and then apply styling to the selection. And I'll apply a green background to those elements. And this should be actually dash child. So that allowed us to do that within the one statement instead of having to loop through each one, instead of having to select them separately. That allowed us to select the item within each one of the matching lists and selecting the nth child. And notice the difference here is that it's not using the index value, that it's using the number of items that are there. So third is going to return back the third one. If we do 4, it's going to return back the fourth one. So in this case, it was matching up with what we had as the index value. We're doing blue, and it was overriding the color within this statement. So that's how you can accomplish this in just one line of code by using the nth child selector.